My name is Jen Benes-Denzen. I served in Kenya from 1998 to 2000, and I was a teacher. I taught English and social education and ethics at Ololunga Secondary School outside of Narok. It was a small boarding school for boys.
I also served in Kenya from 1998 to 2000 and was a science teacher in the same Ololunga Secondary School. Biology, chemistry, business ed, phys ed, sort of the jack of all trades at an all-boys school that was primarily the Maasai. So it was an interesting experience.
I think early on then we were looking out the window and there was someone coming on a motorcycle, and we were like, oh, motorcycle, geez, who's that? And then it was a white person on a motorcycle. Yes. And who's that? I mean, it was like, where are we? What's happening? And it turned out that, you know, down our road and across a river and up the hill on the other side was a missionary family that had been there for a good, I think probably 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. And they had been working with the Maasai, and they knew Maasai, and they'd been in Kenya for multiple tours of duty. They had 3 small girls. They homeschooled the girls there, and we got to know them, and it was just a refreshing of, oh, wow, okay, that's a total possibility that we hadn't thought would happen, but it did. And mm-hmm. they got to be good friends of ours, to the point where there was one night in the middle of the night, and nobody ever stopped by at night because you just didn't visit people at night. You know, we were always told that if somebody came to your door at night, it was only because of trouble. You know, you just didn't, Kenyans didn't visit each other at night, and so there just wasn't, just
when the
never
sun
happened.
went down, people kind of.
And so I think the only time we saw people at night was our neighbor made moonshine, the Changa, and so, you know, there were always people over there drinking the Changa at night, but they never came over to see us. And one night there was a knock at the door, and it was the missionary, and he said, you got to get a bag, put in your bag, you know, a toothbrush, a change of underwear, some money, and your passport. And they said, you know, there's some tribal conflict going on right now, and you've got to be ready. And wouldn't you know, I think it was like the next day or a couple days later, we saw the traditional Maasai warriors walking down, you know, painted up in ochre, and they had their big, huge, you know, shields with them. Mm-hmm. And it was like, oh, he's serious. And so we had it for a while, and then he came back and said, I think it's going to be all right. But that was
the Maasai were going on a raid.
Yeah, well, there was someone had been shot with an arrow somewhere far out, and Claire Good was the name of the missionary, and he came by and said, things are kind of heating up to the north of us, but, you know, you want to be sure that you're safe and can be able to leave if you need to, so sort of just get this stuff ready. Yeah, and he said, if I can, and I'll let you guys know if we're leaving, and, you know, we'll try to swing by here.
Which tribes were involved, do you remember?
I don't know, it was
I think it was just,
I don't remember who the Maasai were fighting.
I thought it was the Kisi.
The Kisi, that's right.
So
something over, there was some dispute, and it ended up ending not the way that it normally ended, and someone got killed, and they went, because Olasidai was his name in Maasai, but he essentially, our missionary was sort of a community leader, and so he sort of was involved sort of in the trenches with a lot of these people, so he knew things and was just very protective of us. I think he loved that we were, you know, I'll never forget, he was in his big mud boots and he's riding his motorbike up, and come on over, we'll have barbecue chicken, we can watch movies. He had ice cream, he had a generator hooked up, he had a, you know, he just sort of was like the Kenyan MacGyver. I mean, he had everything built, and it was just sort of, you'd take about an hour's walk across the lake, or this river, But once you got there, it was like this compound of Americans, and you get to you had food that you don't normally get to eat. You get to slaughter chickens, which you don't get to normally do, and it was sort of like we sort of had Sundays were sort of our mini American, and then he would drive us back at night. And it was just sort of it was a nice release to have other people to talk to, and especially someone as knowledgeable as he was about the area and
the people.
Where was he from?
He was from Pennsylvania. He was a Mennonite.
Okay.
And so he had been all over the place. He'd actually there was a huge flood a few years later, and a few years earlier, and he had actually built a footbridge across the river to help connect where he's from in his area to the little town of Olunga. So he was sort of a local hero, and so it didn't hurt that we were kind of being associated with him. But he said, when I heard there were a couple of other Wazungus around here, I had to come and see right away. And so he just, and he kind of just popped in. He was really, affable, and it was just sort of, it was one of those signs where you're like, this is where we're supposed to be, and this is going to be just fine, And we ended up sometimes when we go to Nairobi, we'd stay at the Mennonite guest house there, which was a great place to stay, and it was cheap, and, it was sort of, you kind of got the best of both worlds of someone in the bush that knew far more than I did about surviving in the bush, but also
because he was the one that told us about
alum in the water, because we would get water from the river, which looked like coffee, and so he said, let me bring some alum, which somehow got all of the particulate matter to stick to the sides of the bucket. So if you just rubbed it around the next day,
But you wanted to rub it in a circular motion so that it would
kind of get a current going, and it would kind of I don't know if it was, I probably should know more about it than I do, but it would take all the particulate matter and have it settle to the sides and the bottom of your bucket. So then at least it was clear for when you boiled it.
It was funny because some of the stuff that the Peace Corps gave you was helpful, and then some of it was like, when would I ever use this? I mean, we were outfitted with bikes. And I guess it might have worked some places. We didn't have a paved road or a hard road. It was sandy and dusty. We couldn't have ridden those bikes anywhere. We rode
them one time.
We rode them one time, and that was we walked them up to the road. So we carried them up, or like walked them up, and then rode them. But it was like the attention that you would draw to yourself.
Yes, it was not worth it.
And the fact that it was so impractical was like, it was a fine, fabulous thought, but very, it just wasn't right for our setting. And other people who were in a little bit more urban settings, I think that they used their bikes more often. But we tried to exercise there, and you just learn how to adapt to things.
You used to run in
I ran in an ankle-length skirt because it just wasn't right to have my legs out in Maasai culture, for sure.
And us running together was always a hoot.
And running together
with your wife. It was just like.
So we ended up running.
I like her. It's.
We ended up running at 6 in the morning. Our home.
And our school didn't even know we were coming. Oh no, they knew that I was coming. They didn't know that I was married.
Right.
About how far away was it?
It was about 3 hours from Nairobi.
It was 3 hours.
If you got in a car and left.
If you got in a car and left.
From Nairobi, but how far from this Naivasha?
From Naivasha, it was a little bit closer. I think it was probably 2 hours.
It was probably 2 hours if you drove directly, but there wasn't a direct form of public transportation to get to either Nairobi or
right. You kind of met
at that time.
This T where you could either hitchhike to Naivasha, or you'd have to kind of go all the way back up to Nairobi and then down to Naivasha.
Yeah.
But when we pulled up, I'll never forget, we met Kamau, who ended up being one of our close friends, and God has really blessed them because we had not one but two teachers. And so then, of course, Jen's sort of feeling like, well, what the hell? They had no idea I was even coming. I mean, I don't know where the miscommunication was, but they were just so ecstatic that we had two teachers that we...
And we would go up, we'd walk up this path, and one morning we scared some zebra that were out there. It's a moment that I'll never forget because you don't anticipate it, but it was just an average morning for us in Kenya. And, the sun is coming up, and, you hear this you know, this noise, and it was like, what is that? And all of a sudden this just herd of zebra just crossed right in front of your path, and then, oh, I guess we're just going to keep walking up to the road.
Yeah. You get there and I'm taking pictures of zebras, and isn't this incredible? And then, you know, 3 months later it's like, enough with the zebras. It's like a squirrel, you know. I mean, but when you first get there, this is this magical, and then is that a zebra eating trash? Yeah, of course it is. You know, and they're knocking them over with their cars to get them out of the way. It was just sort of how quickly it went from being this majestic, incredible creature to, you know, we see those all the time. So, but quickly, because we were a couple, we sort of the walk from to the primary school was right by our house, so you would just get gaggles of kids that would just stand and stare, and that was a hard thing to get used to. Yeah, and
then it stopped.
Yeah, I think then they realized that we weren't going really doing anything that exciting, but it was just sort of the idea that you have these, you know, you'd get back to school after going to Nairobi for something, and how was your trip? You know, people you don't know asking you how your trip was, because the matatu driver, everybody knew where you were, which is a good and bad thing, but it was nice to sort of feel like people were keeping tabs on you. And
there were a couple times when you would be gone and I would be there, and it was, you know, people would ask, like, are you all right? Where did he go? It was still a very male-dominating culture, and so most of our conversations in town, even at the market, which was traditionally a woman's thing to do, you would come to the market with me because it was a great activity. I mean, we enjoyed it. It was something to do, and so we would go together. But even there, it would be the negotiations would happen with Drew rather than me. And so Drew, I can understand Kiswahili. Really, I can hear it and I know what people are talking about, but I don't speak it as well. And I think part of that is because I didn't really get a chance to talk about it.
And they'd ask me how Jen's doing, and she's standing right next to me. And it's like, well, why don't you ask her? You know, it's like, how's your wife? Well, she's, you know, it's that. And then it was always staring at her stomach. When are you gonna have a kid? And so it was, because obviously you're not gonna just be married and not have kids. That's the point. And so it was nice to have you had to say, well, if we got married in the Peace Corps, or pregnant, we would have to leave. So that kind of would diffuse it early on. But why don't you have any kids? You know, because that's sort of the source of your wealth is your children and cows. And so it was hard when we had neither. That, you know, it's sort of trying to work through those cultural differences, but.